Was a small, coordinated network of speculators and financiers with deep pockets and an even deeper understanding of political currents. The result was a fire sale of historic proportions. For example, loan office certificates issued as late as November 1779 were trading at roughly 24 cents on the dollar, a staggering 76% discount from their printed face value. This was not just a market correction, it was a wholesale liquidation of the value of revolutionary sacrifice, where a soldier's years of service could be bought for a pittance. As historian James Ferguson meticulously documented, the individuals selling their certificates at these disastrously low prices were overwhelmingly the relatively poor farmers, shopkeepers, and soldiers who formed the backbone of the revolutionary effort. These were the very people who lacked the financial buffer to hold on to a non-liquid asset for an indefinite period. Their immediate survival depended on their ability to access cash. For them, the choice was not between getting 24 cents on the dollar or waiting for 100 cents. It was between getting something now or facing starvation, foreclosure, or a debtor's prison. The speculators, by contrast, faced no such existential pressures and could patiently accumulate these devalued assets, confident that their political allies would eventually engineer a profitable outcome. This dynamic turned patriotism into a tradable commodity, stripping it of its honor and converting it into a simple financial instrument to be exploited. The market did not care about the story behind each certificate, the winters at Valley Forge, the battles won, the supplies given in good faith. It cared only about the seller's desperation and the buyer's leverage. The transaction was a cold one, severing the original holder from any future claim on the nation's gratitude. Once a veteran sold his IOU for, say, 20 cents on the dollar, his connection to that debt was legally extinguished. He received no further payment, no share of the eventual windfall, effectively ensuring he would remain uncompensated for the vast majority of his wartime service. The human cost of this unregulated market was immense and immediate. Contemporary accounts from the period, most famously the armed uprising known as Shays's Rebellion, testify to the widespread poverty and righteous anger among veterans. Many of these men, who had fought for the ideals of liberty and property, returned home only to find themselves on the brink of losing their own property due to the very debts they incurred while the government failed to pay them. The sight of speculators growing rich off their devalued certificates while they faced financial ruin fueled a deep-seated resentment and a sense that the revolution had been betrayed, its promises hollowed out by a new aristocracy of wealth built on their unrewarded sacrifice. The speculators' bet paid off spectacularly with the passage of Alexander Hamilton's Funding Act of 1790. This landmark legislation consolidated the various forms of state and federal debt and committed the new United States government to redeeming the Continental certificates at 100% of their original face value, plus any accrued interest. It was, honestly, a move designed to establish the nation's credit on the world stage, proving that the United States was a reliable debtor. However, the law made no distinction between the original holders of the debt and the speculators who had acquired it secondhand. Payment was to be made to whomever held the certificate at the time of redemption, a policy that systemically rewarded the financiers and, well, punished the patriots. The impact of this decision was both profound and deeply unjust. A speculator who had purchased a $100 certificate for a mere $20 now stood to receive the full $100 from the United States Treasury, realizing a 400% profit. Meanwhile, the soldier who had earned that certificate through years of hardship and sold it out of desperation received nothing more than the pittance he had already accepted. The Funding Act effectively ratified the predatory dynamics of the secondary market, using the full power and credit of the federal government to enrich the wealthy at the direct expense of the working-class veterans and suppliers. It was a policy that created a clear and lasting division between the winners and losers of the American Revolution. While Paymaster General John Pierce's office did oversee the redemption of an enormous volume of debt, disbursing over $10 million in 1788 against roughly 93,000 certificates, the records tell an incomplete story. Thousands more certificates had been lost over the years, destroyed in fires, or were simply never presented for payment, often because their original holders were deceased or had moved west, far from the centers of government. Furthermore, the official redemption process did not account for the vast number of soldiers who never received a final settlement of their back pay in the first place. For many, the promise of compensation remained just that, a promise broken first by a bankrupt Congress and then by a federal policy that favored speculators. This foundational act of financial engineering cemented a troubling precedent in the nation's DNA. It demonstrated that when faced with a choice between compensating its original, often powerless creditors and bolstering the confidence of its new, powerful ones, the government would side with capital. The system was designed to honor the debt itself, as an abstract financial instrument, rather than the people to whom it was originally owed. This principle, established in the earliest days of the Republic, created a legacy of financial exclusion and laid the philosophical groundwork for future systems where human value and even human identity could be detached from the individual and converted into a monetized asset for the benefit of others. For one brief, shining moment in its history, the United States achieved the unthinkable. It was completely debt-free. On January 1, 1835, President Andrew Jackson's administration officially retired the last dollar of the national debt, bringing the Treasury's books to a perfect zero balance. This was no accounting trick, it was the culmination of a fierce political crusade. Jackson, deeply suspicious of banks and national debt, had systematically vetoed new borrowing, aggressively managed federal revenues from high tariffs and a booming market for public lands, and directed every last surplus dollar toward paying down the nation's obligations. It was a populist victory, a declaration of independence from the financiers and creditors that Jackson believed held undue influence over the Republic. For a fleeting instant, the nation stood on its own, unburdened by the past and unbeholden to lenders. But this debt-free status was as fragile as it was historic. The very policies that had generated the surpluses to pay off the debt soon became the engines of its ruin. The federal government's income was heavily dependent on land sales, but once the most desirable lands were sold off, that revenue stream began to dry up. Jackson's war on the financial system, particularly his veto of the Second Bank of the United States recharter and his 1836 specie circular requiring land purchases in gold or silver, created a massive credit contraction. Without a central bank to regulate the currency, state-chartered pet banks faltered, credit markets seized up, and the economic boom that had filled the Treasury's coffers ground to a screeching halt. The House of Cards collapsed with the Panic of 1837, a perfect storm of plummeting cotton prices, rampant land speculation, and a cascade of bank failures plunged the nation into a severe and prolonged depression. State governments, which had borrowed heavily to finance canals and railroads, began to default on their own debts, amplifying the financial chaos. The federal government, now starved of its primary revenue sources, customs duties and land sales, found itself unable to pay its own bills. The dream of a debt-free America dissolved in less than 2 years, replaced by the urgent reality of a government that was once again broke and facing a fiscal emergency of its own making. By 1837, Congress was forced to authorize the issuance of new Treasury notes, a form of short-term debt, simply to meet its basic payroll and operational expenses. The debt-free era was officially over. By 1842, the national debt was back over $20 million, and the Mexican-American War pushed it past $63 million shortly thereafter. This episode proved a critical lesson in a modernizing, industrializing economy subject to booms and busts. A government without the ability to borrow is a government without the ability to function in a crisis. Jackson's victory was a Pyrrhic one. He had slain the monster of debt, only to prove that the nation could not live without it, setting the stage for the perpetual cycle of borrowing that defines our government to this day. So, how does the modern debt machine actually work? It's not like a credit card you eventually pay off. Instead, think of it as a perpetual motion machine fueled by taxes and new borrowing. When the federal government runs a deficit, which it almost always does, it covers the shortfall by auctioning off Treasury securities, bills, notes, and bonds. These are IOUs sold to investors, ranging from large pension funds and foreign governments to individual American savers. In exchange for their cash today, the Treasury promises to pay them back in the future with interest. That interest, known as debt service, isn't paid from some magical fund. It comes directly out of the tax revenues collected from your labor and business earnings. Every paycheck you get contributes to this massive, ongoing payment stream. The real trick to the system is what happens when these securities come due. Imagine you own a $1,000 10-year Treasury note. At the end of 10 years, the government owes you your $1,000 back, but the Treasury rarely has a surplus sitting around to pay you. So, what does it do? It simply holds a new auction, sells a brand new security to